Hi guys, Stuart Tomlinson, Warrior Collective, back once again for Inside Chat. I hope you're well, whether you're listening or watching. Today I'm super excited to have my next guest on, and that is multiple times world champion and kind of UK combat sports pioneer, Gary Turner. Gary, how are you?
I'm flattered by your welcome. Thank you so much. Pioneer? No, I just got up and did what I did, and there were many before me, and there were many at the same time, and many afterwards. So yeah, there's a bit of flattery there that may not be deserved. I still describe myself as a small fish in a very big pond. But no, it's an honour to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh no, yeah, we're all very, it's humility is the big thing in martial arts, but I think it's well deserved that blowing of the trumpet because I remember, obviously, back in the day, you were fighting all the time. You were one of the main UK fighters, repping multiple scenes as well. I mean, and we'll get into that, but it wasn't just one combat sport. You were of that era that kind of really took it out there on different platforms. But if we go back a little, then, just because some people listening to this might not have seen any of your fights or might not have come across,
Yeah.
uh, you know, your name because it's been a few years since you last competed. But when did you start training in martial arts then?
So I started on September the 2nd, 1976, on my sixth birthday. Yep, at the time I record, I'm 50 now. I'm getting on a bit, hence why a lot of the youth would not have heard of me. I'm one of the dinosaurs of the combat sports world. So yeah, 1976 I started with judo. That progressed through to I stopped competing in 91. I was an international from 83, British schools judo team in 87. I loved my judo, it was really, really cool. And then 88, I was doing traditional jiu-jitsu as well. Then 88, I started Laogar Kung Fu as well as the judo, which became points kickboxing, which I was particularly bad at, which then became light continuous kickboxing, that became full contact kickboxing. Then I did shoot fighting. I was international shoot fighter when I won the Golden Dragon Cup in Rimini back in 92, I think it was, or 91, and started doing things that I was asked to do. Got asked if I wanted to come and do a trial with the sport jiu-jitsu team. Ended up fighting for Britain and travelling the world, winning a few world titles for that. I was in the WAKO, the WACO kickboxing team, fighting around the world. I then started doing my full contact career, doing my professional fighting as well. So I was doing little bits of full contact, low kick, style fighting, picking up a few titles there. And then we just kind of did back then what we were asked to do. No, Gary, can you do this? Okay, I'll have a go. Next thing, I'm fighting mixed martial arts for Lee Hasdall and some of the pioneering shows in the UK. And then just then I thought, well, the money's in the super heavyweights. So 2000, I switched to super heavyweight. Well, actually, I got asked to do the K1, the K1 UK 8-man tournament. So I did that, but at 88.5 kilos, fighting Matt Skelton at 118 kilos, having all the effect of a fly hitting a truck windscreen, I thought I'd better put some tubby lard ass on. So put on weight and moved up to super heavyweights, then fought on K1. Got asked if I could fight Tank Abbott at a few weeks' notice on Cage Rage, so ended up headlining Cage Rage at a few weeks' notice. Mixed martial arts, yeah, I just did what I did. So, in summary, career highlights: 13 world titles across kickboxing, Thai boxing, and mixed martial arts. I was UK K1 champion. I was British Wushu Kwan champion. Threw that one in there. That's a random one. I was British Schools judo team, and I was there at the inception development of mixed martial arts. I was an international shoot fighter. Even competed on the 10K karate challenge, where never having done karate before, I stepped up and fought. Who did I fight? Paul Newby. I was world bronze medalist. I lost 3-2 against Paul, so I didn't do too badly. But hey, I was never going to win. I'm not a karate fighter. So fingers in many pies, doing what we did, traveling the world, meeting some really cool people, and having a good time as we did it. Ignoring the business back then, because there was no business back then. We just did it because we loved it. Yeah, I've been about a bit, but I'm still only a small fish in a very big pond. Although I did swim with a few big fish.
No, I mean I mean you mentioned it then, and this is kind of like I remember like when you were saying, you know, of that mid 90s, you know, mid to mid noughties, your kind of name seemed to kind of flash up in, like you said, all these different places, like, you know, like Continuous Sport Jiu-Jitsu, K1, and like you mentioned, you, that generation were like, fight anywhere, go anywhere, whatever the rule set. What do you remember of the training back when you started then, back in those early days?
Oh, the training. Well, part of the ethos I'm trying to get rid of now of train hard, fight easy. I used to train incredibly hard, not as clever as I should. We should train clever, fight easier, and then we can live healthier and longer as well and be better fighters. But yeah, train hard, fight easy. I'll be training 2 to 4 times a day, Monday to Friday, sometimes on a Saturday as well. Incredibly hard sparring because I'm stupid. Um, Conditioning, multidisciplinary. You bump into people. Hey Gary, you're a judo black belt, aren't you? Yeah. And you do kickboxing? Yeah. So does my friend Andy. He's got a kickboxing club. Let me introduce you. Okay. Andy Jardine, come on over. Okay. And we just go and train. We would, you know, we would travel. We were like the fighting nomads back then. We'd have our core teams, but we would just go traveling and having some fun. As an end result, I just got to meet, like you, so many really cool, really so many diverse people. You've had Buster Reeves on recently, and when he started his stunt career, he lived with me down south because it was close to the studios, things like that. Just all these little journeys that we all have, and we all intermingle. And the big thing about the training back then, everyone supported each other, and we all, you know, like Buster coming and staying with me, for example. We were chatting about Buster beforehand. Um, with Buster coming and staying with me, everyone supported each other. As long as our friends were doing well, we didn't care about ourselves. It was really good. So back then, especially, it was an incredibly close yet diverse fight family. It was fun.
Yeah, because I mean, like I said, at that generation, there was no social media, there was no internet. You kind of, you did all these things ad hoc. I mean, I remember when I went over to Holland and I was living over there at 17. You had to go and to the gyms yourself and find out what the training was like and go and train everywhere and meet people. You know, you couldn't go for a Google review. You had to go and get out there yourself. So it was definitely that generation. I mean, and you, when you mentioned earlier about your career, you know, I mean, you kind of mentioned Tank Abbott. I've got to pick on that. How was that fight? Because obviously at one point Tank Abbott was like the monster, you know, in terms of MMA. And what do you remember about that fight?
Not a lot. My head's still spinning, I think. No, it's because I was called up at, I think, 5 weeks' notice to fight Bob Sapp. And because Bob Sapp was originally billed an English fighter, had to pull out through injury. So no, they gave me a shout, knowing that yeah, I'd do it. I'm stupid enough to jump in and do everything. I got the call, and Bob Sapp had recently lost to Crocop in K1, who'd hit him with an overhand right that struck his left orbital bone and broken his orbital bone. Now, Bob Sapp, I haven't got a hope in hell of defeating physically, but psychologically, Bob Sapp was quite weak. So I thought, right, what do we do to deconstruct him psychologically? And my whole strategy was to go out and land a single overhand right onto his left orbital bone, and Bob would collapse crying to the floor, and I would therefore win with a single shot and be legend. So then, of course, Bob Sapp realised that, hang on, that's Gary from K1, who's been training in the Netherlands with, people like Remy Bonjasky, Petter Ertz, Tyrone Spong, Alexander Overeem. Alexander Overeem, Overeem, Alistair Overeem, Valentin Overeem, people like that. And he wasn't a bum. This guy's not been stopped. He's been, he's a bit of an ugg. And oh heck, I'm actually in a fight. And he didn't get on the plane. So suddenly Cage Rage were like, who can we get? So like me, old school, they phoned Tank Abbott, massive name, and Tank's like, yeah, I get off my Huntington Beach bar stool, I'm coming on over. And I'm like, oh damn, now I've got a real fighter. Bob looks like a drunken bum. Sorry, Bob. Tank looks like a drunken bum, but he's anything but. If you watch the video, I throw a really fast leg kick in, and he instantly leg checks it. In videos, you can see him dropping sort of 300-pound benches off his chest, bench press. And it's not the fact that he does 300-pound bench presses; it's the fact he just bounces it off his chest. It's possibly actually even more than that. The guy's resilient, he's strong, he's like a true legend of the combat sports. And I'm like, okay, I've got a fighter here. So it also had a great sense of humour. We hadn't met before, and at the press meet the day before, went, "Hey, oh, brilliant! How you doing, Tank?" I said, "Yeah, you're not bad, not bad. Can I have a picture?" "Yeah, sure." We're just doing like a selfie together. I said, "Great, got to get a photograph in before you mess my face up." He's like, "Why would I mess your face up?" I'm like, "I'm Gary. You're fighting me tomorrow," and he just wet himself laughing. Top lad. But yeah, so I went out there against Tank Abbott, and I thought, right, would I have been able to land that overhand right? Bearing in mind that it would be so much easier on Bob Sapp, but could I land it on Tank Abbott? So I went out there, and the first thing I did, of course, was land the most perfect, the sweetest overhand right. Bob Sapp would have collapsed, legs underneath him, on the floor, fight would have been over. Legend. Unfortunately, this was Tank Abbott. All it did was draw back the biggest overhand right that he had in response. And I could say that if my back foot wasn't on the floor, I would probably be dead. I then had to win the fight the hard way, but yeah, I won it, and I knocked his tooth out. We drank brandy afterwards, and it's just one of those crazy life experiences. It was fun. You can Google it, those who haven't seen it. If you put Tank v Turner into YouTube, you'll find the fight, and it's definitely an entertaining fight. Let's just say that I had Terminator music playing in my head a few times as I became the Terminator through the onslaught. It was fun.
And obviously, going from competing, you're not just a one trick pony. You've got multifacets to your kind of career and your what you're interested in. How did, obviously you're a hypnotist, you're a hypnotherapist, you're an author. You kind of ticking all the intellectual boxes alongside being such a top level. They don't usually go together, do they? Kind of like, there's not many. I can think of a few, but it's not your stereotype. Kind of fighter who goes around everywhere, who actually has more to what they want to achieve than just within the ring. How did all those other aspects get started for you? Were they something that you were wanting to do when you were training, competing, or did they really start to come more towards the end?
Well, it's just, it's like, you go, Gary the fighter, Gary the geek. So I'm a bully's worst nightmare. I'm a geek who can fight. But I've always been a geek. I'm probably on the autistic spectrum. My PhD supervisor, I'm doing a PhD, I keep saying, Gary, you're so far on the autistic spectrum. And they keep dragging me up out of rabbit holes I've dived down. But I've always been a geek. And with my fighting, I think it's Jesse Saunders from Shin Kick. Jess went, Gary, you do things at fighting that you just can't actually do, but you still do them. I used to beat people psychologically, so I've always had an interest in psychology. And then I was realizing that, as we were analysing our opponents, we weren't really looking at how good they were and their techniques and the rest of it, and their physical abilities. We were looking at their minds more. So my whole coach team was kind of psychological based anyway. And then I was doing a lot of work for the British Army because I lived right next to Aldershot, home of the British Army. So I spent a lot of time, 3-5 times a week, with the Army School of Physical Training, training with the instructors. I'd be a sparring partner for the Army boxing team. I had a good name with the Army, so they started asking me to do bits of work for them. I was a subject matter expert on armed combat and such like, and I couldn't charge them because it's the Army and it's me paying back for abusing their facilities and resources. So they said, we've got to give you something. I said, you're interested in psychology, aren't you? I'm like, yeah, come to some of our psych courses. I'm like, hell yeah. And, it developed from there. And that's how I became a hypnotherapist and such like. And my interest in psychology really rocketed forward. And then a few years ago, I was tagged in an online forum where a certain professor, Eric Anderson, was saying that allowing kids to be hit in the head in combat sports was child abuse by definition. So I got called in as the credible Hulk, because I back up my rage with facts and figures, to go and encounter his views. And I went there and I found him incredibly engaging. Not only could he give me all the geeky stuff that I needed to understand, he could also put things really bluntly to those who needed it put bluntly, because some in the fight industry are they need things put sort of nice and simple for them, and he could do that. So I gave myself 2 weeks to prove him wrong. And unfortunately, 2 weeks later, I came back and said, not only is everything he says correct, he's also understating it. It's actually far worse than what he says. Damn, I've had to change my opinion because I'd learned more. And then 2 years later, I started doing my doctorate, which I'm 2 years into now, researching the behavioural effects of head impacts in combat sport athletes. But yeah, the two match itself really well. There's definitely other academics in the combat sports, and I think what I like about the combat sports, people will generally think that it's just like Harry the Hug, oh, let's get off the building site and go mash people and all the rest of it. Well, in fact, it's just every walk in life is there in the combat sports. It's the best leveler that I know. For example, when I teach, I've got all kinds of ages, all kind of sexes. I've got transgender, I've got autistic, I've got Down syndrome lad, Chris Bantam, Paralympian, said, Gary, can you teach me to fight? So we'll work it out. And he's there in his wheelchair. Had to put outriggers on so when he gets kicked, he didn't fall over backwards. We got a blind guy that came with his wander dog, Wes. Wander because we wonder whether he's actually going to lead him the right way. He's too busy getting snuggles. Literally, we've got every walk of life, students to millionaires, from celebrity people through to people that never want their face shown apart from at training. We're just welcoming. Combat sports as a whole are incredibly inclusive. And yeah, unfortunately, that includes geeks like me.
I mean, I agree completely. I mean, martial arts is hugely diverse and inclusive. If, of course, the coaches in the gyms kind of develop their ethos around that, the head coach is usually the person who dictates the ethos and the kind of environment, don't they? So it's you'd like to think that was every single gym and club, but I know from experience it's probably not. But the potential for it is crazy. And when it's done right, it's my favorite thing in the world for some of those reasons. So it's kind of like, I guess, from someone looking out now, and they hear you talking about some of the things that you raise. It's kind of like, surely Gary kind of came from martial arts. He should be supporting the continuation of traditional martial arts in terms of contact and sparring, because I'm guessing you're not making many friends by rocking the boat and wanting change, because people don't like change, do they? So you've talked about the PhD you're doing then. So I'm guessing you're like one of the best people to speak to with regards to these studies. So if you kind of, I know obviously there's the massive data and massive studies, but if you break it down a little bit then, what have you found that kind of changed your mind with regards to, the levels of contact in combat sports? And again, you're talking about juniors, but I'm guessing that just as the studies not long back which talked about concussion in American football, there's game-changing studies that happen all the time, isn't there? It's going to be equally as relevant to adults, but obviously with juniors, they're not legally responsible for themselves, are they?
Correct. Let's see how quickly I can bring people up to speed. So basically, combat sports have to wake up to the effects of head injuries. If we don't wake up to the effects of head injuries, we will be legally finished. Litigation will take combat sports down. Over 3,000 multi-million pound out-of-court settlements for the NFL. The National Hockey League, the NHL, have followed suit. I've been involved in the inception of the World Rugby litigation that's taking place. Litigation will be taking place in football following suit. And us at combat sports, we're the low-hanging fruit. What we know now is that even at a very low head acceleration, it creates brain damage and brain injury. Brain damage is when we create damage at the cellular level. When it aggregates to a tissue level, it creates dysfunction, which is injury. For example, we can have a dent in the car, which is damage the car, but it won't affect performance. If we really give it a good kicking, then we're going to adversely affect the performance, which will be the injury. The simplest way of describing it is, with what we know now, every single hit, even light contact or glancing blows in combat sports, will cause brain damage, and it will very quickly, over just one hit or over several hits, aggregate to cause injury. Basically, here we go. I've got some props for you. Let me know what happens. It's a brain. It's a brain in a jar. Okay, so a water-filled balloon hanging in a little glass jar. We'd have like a skull, so we'd have a scalp around the outside and hair. But that's your skull. Inside the skull, we'll have meninges, some soft tissue, and then we've got the brain, a little blob of jelly floating in the middle. There's a little bit of fluid in there, cerebrospinal fluid. But basically, that's your brain. You get hit, your brain's bouncing around. It will stretch and it will compress and then bounce. As it does so, strain passes through the brain. Also, we get rotation, where the brain will rotate. As it does, it will stretch, it will bounce and create strain in the brain. That strain is a pain. There we go, I've got spaghetti. If I gently twist it, not much will happen. It might start just to weaken, it might start to perforate. But if I really go for it, this is where my girlfriend goes, "What you done?" There's bits of spaghetti fly over. We actually break connections. So as we break connections, basically the insides start spilling out, creating something called the neurometabolic cascade. And that has long-term adverse effects, short and long-term adverse effects. We can think of it like, here we go, think of it like three bridges over a river, and there could be an earthquake. And you want to go from one side to the other side, from A to B. There's an earthquake, but the first bridge breaks because of the earthquake. Well, now we can go down and we can go along the second one and up to where we want to go. But there's another earthquake and that one goes. Oh, damn. Now we've got to go further still to get over there. We still have the function, it just takes longer, it's slowing us down. And of course, if there's another earthquake, we just might not get there at all. So basically, every one of these hits that we get to our head, whether it's a glancing blow, whether it's got headgear, big gloves or whatever as well, is creating brain damage. That brain damage will break connections. As it breaks connections, we lose functions. As it perforates, it creates disruption. That creates injury, creates dysfunction. Even just 6 headers of a football have shown to lower our cognitive abilities, impair our memory, and create a loss of control on our body, which is why the more hits to the head you get, the more injuries that you're going to get overall for your body, because you've got less control. Quite simply, getting hit in the head isn't doing us any favours. It leads to short-term impairments. Over the longer term, more impairments. Over the late effects, we get the earlier onset and more rapid development of neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinsonism, dementias, motor neuron diseases. It screws us up in later life, and it's always a compared to what position. It's my brain now, what was it like before? 3 rounds of boxing sparring, and it reduces your mental capabilities and your physical capabilities. So a single concussion is likely to give you adverse health effects and adverse life outcomes over a wide range of metrics. Getting hit in the head is not good. That's not good for your health and not good for your lifespan. But most importantly for the fighters listening, because we're stupid, right? We don't care about our health. We know that jumping in the ring, we're going to get hit in the head. It's not going to do us any favours. But from our side, getting hit in the head adversely affects our performance. Firstly, to get a concussion or to get knocked out, for example, you can think of it like a power bar. You get a little hit, the power bar depletes a little bit. You get a big hit, it depletes quickly. But we've only got so much in that power bar before we start getting those effects. That power bar runs out. So the more hits we get in training, the more likely we are to get knocked out in competition. Not only that, the less control we've got on our body. So that stupid hard sparring that I used to do, and I used to be renowned for it. We used to have like big boy sparring on a Friday, where we pound 10 bells out of each other. Stupid behaviour with what I know now, because that's taken away from my ability. Now, don't get me wrong, when we spar, obviously we're going to get performance enhancements. But with the brain injuries, it's like taking 3 steps forward, but then taking nearly 3 steps back. What we should be doing is, hang on, when we're sparring, what actually gives us the benefit, the stimulus response, and let's take away those negatives. So yeah, so I'm now a huge advocate for health for fighters, and I'm a huge advocate for performance for fighters. And both look at the same thing: limit the hits to the head, because once your neuron's gone, it's gone. As I've got more spaghetti to pick up off the floor. That's it in a quick nutshell. As always, I waffle too much.
No. I mean, it's a really good explanation, and like you said before about going down the rabbit hole. This obviously opens up. When you talk about, let's say, boxing, for example, where head contact is one of the main aspects of the sport. How do you then view sports like boxing, kickboxing, those contact sports where those head contact is a major part of that sport? How do you see them adapting then in terms of both the training within the clubs that are affiliated to those associations, let's say, for the example, the ABA, or within actual competition itself?
At the moment, boxing's under risk of litigation for failing in their duty of care. So they've really got to pull their socks up under all levels. And I'm a lot of my work, a lot of my PhD is designed to actually help combat sports pull their fingers out and meet their duty of care, where we can persist with our sport but keep everybody safer at the same time. So the problem with boxing is there's a lack of medical attention and a lack of concern. We need to understand that when a guy's got a hit to the head, if they receive another hit to the head, it could actually be catastrophic. We need to be aware of that. I've got a paper in at the moment in respect to recognising the signs and symptoms of concussion during a combat sports bout. I want to help them with that. But the big problem is, we've always known in boxing, we've got dementia pugilistica, we've got punch drunk syndrome, we've got chronic traumatic encephalopathy, we've got the CTE, as it's shortened for. We've known for over a century that boxing screws us up, and it goes back to the Hippocratic corpus and the works of Hippocrates with he called it I can't remember what terms it now, but basically a concussive impact. He knew, thousands of years BC, that it screwed our brains up. We know it doesn't do any favors, but it's what we do about it that counts. So in boxing, we've got to start being clever with our training. We've got to start limiting the head impacts. It's going to increase our performance if we do that. In the ring, we need to make sure that the referees, the corners, the coaches, the medics, the attendees, even introducing one of my recommendations in my paper is to introduce concussion spotters independent of everything else, to look purely for the signs and symptoms of concussion in the fighters, and then of course to have the appropriate medical care afterwards, because at the moment it's severely lacking. To give you an idea, under NICE guidance, if you present at an emergency accident emergency hospital, and you've got something called a neurological deficit, which could be like a wobbly legs after being hit in the boxing ring, you'll be immediately referred for emergency CT scan for a potential catastrophic brain bleed. So when you see someone's legs go in the boxing ring, they should actually be immediately evac'd to an appropriate A&E facility for emergency CT scan, because they may have a subdural hematoma or other kind of brain bleed that's causing that effect. It's a serious brain injury, but boxing seems to be ignoring that at the moment. And if they don't pull their socks up, then they're gonna be facing litigation for failing to meet their duty of care. The Watson versus British Boxing Board of Control court case following Michael Watson's horrendous injuries in the boxing ring is a case in point. It clearly shows that consent to participate is not consent to harm through the failings of the organisation. So, in other words, boxing needs to put its socks up to keep all us fighters far, far safer. And yeah, it's got a long way to go, unfortunately. And we're low-hanging fruit for the litigation. Yeah, it's horrendous. I despair at the state of combat sports at the moment. And if we don't pull our socks up, we're going to be finished by litigation. And that's the big scare. That is a real big scare. Those of you listening, there should be an ambulance and an appropriately trained doctor at mat side or ringside for every single event. Quite often you'll see combat sports events with just a few St John ambulance people there. You actually need a doctor at every single ring or mat side actually paying close attention to it. Otherwise, there's a risk of death. There was a wacko tournament in South America a few weeks ago, and a boxer took a head kick and he died in the ring. And the medics weren't even there. They had to come running on over after being shouted. Too late. We've got to do better. It's as simple as that. Otherwise, litigation will finish us long before they change the law to ban our sports. So that's what I'm driving. I want to actually want to ask. And sometimes some people see me as the bad guy, but I'm just calling the uncomfortable truths. I've got no skin in the game. I'm not getting paid for what I'm doing. I'm just doing my PhD because I'm enjoying it. So, you know, from my side, I actually want the combat sports to continue. Just let's be safer and let's give ourselves the best opportunities to continue for others just pull the rug from under our feet.
Yeah, I mean, and also you're going to be fighting that that historical thing of martial arts, combat sports being a tough guy sport, and men, you know, don't, you know, stereotypically like to voice any weakness or, you know, this is not comfortable or whatever. So it's always been, you know, like you said before, you've got to, you know, and you'll still see it today in some gyms, you've got to take those shots, you've got to, you know, you've got to be durable, you've got to go through it. And so you're fighting a battle on a multiple fronts with combat sports, aren't you, in terms of the old school mentality of training, having hard sparring or you know, this repeated head contact as the way that they develop their fighters to fight, haven't you? You've got to, that's a big thing to tackle right there.
Yeah. It's, you know, I mean, in combat sports, generally a fighter will become a coach, or coach fighters will become a coach, and you get this historical progression going through. There's very little, although it's coming in more now with the high business of combat sports. There's very little sports science actually getting in the mix, and even there, I think it often misses the point. I mean, basically, the end result of being a fighter is we just want the appropriate response to stimuli. We want to spot as early as possible what our opponent's doing, and then appropriately respond to it in a way that serves us best. If we consider that, our whole training should be based around that, the appropriate response to stimuli, not getting bigger, faster, stronger, better technique, but it's just that appropriate response to stimuli. Then we are all going to start improving. So we do it because we've always done it, that kind of thing. But we simply know more now. You know, sports performance is about edge work. We find the edge of our ability, safely exceed it, and then find out what we need to do to move the edge of our ability and keep on improving. So why don't the coaches do the same? Why doesn't the culture do the same? And as an anecdote for us to think about, I do a lot of work with the British Army. As a result, I get a lot of individuals coming in. We've got the hyper-masculine nature of combat sports. You know, toughen up, man up, and all the rest of it. Suck it up, buttercup. So let's put it into, you know, not showing weakness. The members of 22 Regiment SAS who've come in, I want to work with them. They're the first to voice and explore their weaknesses, because they know that by understanding that they've got weaknesses, they can do something about it and turn them into strengths. If only combat sports did the same. What I say, if it's good enough for the British Army, full stop, let alone our special forces, it's got to be good enough for us, eh?
So obviously, as someone who's, I mean, this is again, you've got kind of a unique perspective because of your background, you know, and therefore, you know, unlike let's say a medical practitioner who's, you know, just a scholar who's never actually been involved in the sport, you've got first-hand experience, and you know that gives you that unique eye for it. If you someone who's coaching or who's running a gym right now, what would you say to them about what things could they be doing right now in their gym with regard to training that would, in your opinion, make it steps towards a better future for combat sports? If we move away from competition for a second and talk about grassroots, what could be done at that level?
For a start, let's just say that immediately after going back on that forum to counter Eric's views, who's now my professor, uh, I stopped head contact for under 16s. A couple of months later, I learned that it's actually child abuse if you're still doing it, if you're allowing head contact under 18 by Child Protection Sport Unit policy. So I'm sorry, I don't want anyone pointing that finger at me. So I moved it from 16 years to no head contact under 18. And then a couple of months later, through a lot of pre PhD research, getting my proposal together, which took a heck of a lot of work in itself, I was realising that head contact was really bad for performance, full stop. So I removed it for everyone in my classes. So we don't do head contact in my classes. When we've got professional fighters, obviously they're going to compete. So we generally leave the head contact for when they actually compete. But we still need them to train for shots coming towards the head and how to adjust it. So the more novel training methodologies that I'm producing includes things like super slow motion work, where we literally spar at really slow motion. In doing so, we have a chance to recognize the first signs, the first observable happenings of a response from an opponent, so we can anticipate it and select the right response, stimulus and response. It gives us time to do that, recognize the stimulus as early as possible, select and implement the right response. So super slow motion training. Also, when we have super slow motion head impact, obviously this is not enough to cause a violent head movement, but what it can do is allow us to enable our necks to tense in the right way to help resist that force and prevent our head having that acceleration. So I do a lot of super slow motion work and a lot of varieties with it. Well, 25% speed, 50% speed, that kind of thing. I have it as one person doing 25% speed and the other person, without touching the head, doing full speed. Creating a perceptual time distort on it. So you can still train for head impacts, yet without creating that damage. So if these novel training methodologies started being implemented, you're going to have less harm and more benefit with better fighters when it comes to actually compete. There's literally going to be better fighters, better able and healthy at the same time. But yeah, we've got to pay consideration to what we know now and the legislation. And bear in mind, it's exponential. What we know now is 10 times more than this time last year, which is 10 times more than the year before. And the more we learn, the scarier it's getting, to be honest. So we have to wake up. We've got to smell the coffee, and we've got to pull our socks up.
So obviously you've probably mentioned this to a few gyms already. What's been the response that you've had so far? Because like I said, they're really big game changers, aren't they? Because typically, anyone who's in the gym will say, oh, sparring, the contact's what I enjoy, and suddenly and especially with martial arts, typically having quite a lot of children that train, don't they, across all clubs across the world. And to be fair to gyms, the really good gyms, I think, minimize contact regardless. But you do see on social media people putting up videos, and you despair, don't you, of children kicking 10 bells out of each other, or people being encouraged to hit harder. So what's been the response so far from the gyms that you've recommended this to, and also with regards to any that have done it? I'm guessing there's going to be people who are going to argue that they're not going to be able to develop athletes using that sort of system. And again, they're going to be saying, well, where's the proof this can work? And that's the middle ground, isn't it? Right now, it's going from here to here. It's we're getting everyone on board and convincing the coaches who are respected in the industry to lead and show that it can be done. And that's, I guess, where it's at right now.
Yeah, we're getting there. We've obviously got the people who put their feet down, stomp their feet, often attacking me rather than attacking the points that I make, and it's quite, it gets quite interesting to say the least. But it's like under 18s, for example, with the head contact, the IMAF, International Mixed Martial Arts Association or Federation, whatever it is, can't say it right, they don't allow for head impacts to those under the age of 16 already. So that should be 18, but it's already been removed, so you can't compete with that already. So there's changes already taking place. There's quite a few gyms at the moment who are not allowing head contact for children. Safeguarding in martial arts, the subset of the Child Protection in Sport unit of the NSPCC, in conjunction with Sport England, their best practice is no head contact for children. Children being the legal definition under the age of 18. So there's a lot of positive changes taking place. I do get quite a few coaches contact me saying, what can we do differently that's of more benefit? And there's data out there, stimulus response is what's required, the appropriate response to stimulus. We need to work and continue working on these novel training that is far better. And more beneficial than what we had before. It's different everything we got before and more without the health effects, while still keeping the enjoyment of the sport, of course. And it's starting. I'm getting a few people come back with some good ideas, for me to put into place. There's good discussions taking place. So overall, I would suggest that the movement is positive in the right direction. Once people realise that I'm not trying to get rid of our sport, I'm actually trying to preserve it. Not only that, I'm trying to make us better at our sport. Talking in terms of performance rather than health is a big benefit there. Overall, we're slowly starting to get there. People are starting to wake up, and good coaches are starting to realise that, hey, this excessive head contact that we're doing, we've got to start cutting this out. We need to mitigate and potentially actually remove this from training. It's where the most damage is caused. So yeah, we've got to think performance as well as health, and whichever way we do it, head contact won't provide us with that. Overall, positive. There are some people who are quite vocally against my suggestions, though.
And going off that then, if we go back to events, obviously there's masses of events, isn't there, in every country, especially, that if you think about, the background you came from originally, the tournament scene, and they're the lower level ones that typically, they're not going to have the money for the sort of medical coverage that, you might be suggesting. What do you think is the future of this grassroots events in terms of, its rule sets? Because we've discussed obviously medical coverage, but in terms of its rule sets and what's allowed at competition, because again, that's the thing with martial arts as well, isn't it? There's no one governing body. There's so many different martial arts styles. There's boxing, there's kickboxing, there's this, there's that. So what do you think is going to be the future for that then?
About 10 years ago, safeguarding in sport was brought in, and there was a lot of objections to safeguarding in sport. Hence the development of the Child Protection Sport Unit, and then developing the subset of that, the safeguarding in martial arts. I had a few conversations with the CPSU last year, and they agree that head contact for children is, by their very policy definition, child abuse and goes against all child welfare legislation. We literally know more now, but it will, like safeguarding, take time to filter through to that level. So rules are starting to change. There are some top Thai boxing referees from the UK who will now refuse to referee children having head contact under the age of 18. The IMAF, mixed martial arts, will not allow head impacts for children under the age of 16, and I believe that will move to under 18 as well. So the rules are changing. Awareness is growing, and I'm doing my best to drive awareness in combat sports. For example, signs and symptoms of concussion. Most people don't even know what a sign and a symptom is. A sign would be an observable happening. A symptom would be something I'd experience myself. For example, you can tell if I've got a headache now or not. That would be a symptom, perhaps, of concussion. Yet a sign would be wobbly legs after being hit, for example. Everyone can see the effects of that coordination problem. So awareness is slowly growing. If we don't have a concussion policy in place, what happens if we've got concussion, whether as a coach, a club or competition, for example, or organisation, and if it's not been in place since 2012, the case law shows we are failing in our duties of care and we're at risk of litigation. So for the listeners, if you're a coach, if you're a club, if you're an organisation, if you're any kind of stakeholder and you do not have a concussion policy in place that's up to date, heads up, look to the Concussion in Sport group. Their latest consensus statement is what we should be doing as minimum. It's about to be updated, but offset the year by COVID. So we all need to do better there, and the rules are starting to change. One of my peers in head injury research, Alex Channon from Brighton University, him and his team over the last couple of years have done a lot of research into more grassroots regional competitions in martial arts and combat sports, and they found horrendous medical attention. They found doctors being overruled by promoters. They found people not being qualified turning up as medics. They found that the bigger the bag the medics got, the more equipment, even if the medic's not trained to use that equipment, the more the perception of their knowledge is. It's really, really bad. We've got to do better. A combat sport event should not take place with head contact unless at ringside is an appropriately trained medical professional who's trained to recognise and treat the signs and symptoms of head contact and traumatic brain injury in their client. So I think fees might go up, but we must have that there. If you do not have the right medical attention, you are at risk of litigation. You're failing your duty of care. And hey, no one wants the finger pointed at them. We're all good guys. But yeah, I see in the next 5 years one heck of a lot of changes in the combat sport world to make sure that we're doing better. Rule changes and the overall environments in which we're competing.
Yeah, I mean, I can really see what you're saying, and I'm guessing like with the mixed martial arts and the Muay Thai, traditionally they've kind of, with the mixed martial arts, they concentrate on the grappling at that point, and with Muay Thai, it's always been scored more for the clinch, the kick. How have those? Because the tournament scene really in the UK has always been from the karate, like continuous. Where do they stand with this then? Because again, a lot of their stuff is going to be juniors, head contact points, head contacts, like continuous kickboxing, head contact, sport boxing. You can see it all the time, and they're the ones that I think are the most prolific. How has their response been, and where do you think they need to go then?
To be honest, that's where most of the ejections have come from. That field. I mean, back in the late 80s and through the 90s, I did hundreds of such tournament style events, points like continuous, even full contact, and the medical attention that we had there is probably just as bad now as it was back then. St John ambulances and things like that. We've got one national body, and I called them out on it, and I wasn't thanked for it. But basically, they've got their own world governing body and their requirements for medical attention that they didn't actually apply at their own events. And it's like, this is crazy. You're failing your duty of care. You're at risk of litigation. Not only that, you're at risk of a kid dying. You're at risk of someone dying. Do you want that on your conscience? It's a big thing. You know, they've got to wake up. They've got to do better, because if not, it's just going to take that first litigation. The floodgates open. I've already had lawyers contact me, litigation solicitors contact me for this very reason, to see if I can give expert witness and the other people that I can recommend for expert witnesses, you know, in potential litigation in the future. They're looking at us now. It is coming. It is just a matter of when, not if. So yeah, all of these regional tournaments, things like the FSKs, you know, the equivalents of the FSKs around the world, freestyle karate tournaments around the world, or around the country that we had then. We've got to have the right medical attention. We've got to do better, because otherwise it's just going to be stopped. We're going to be finished through litigation. It's terrible.
And what about the rule sets then? Because they're the ones that you tend to see more of, the juniors with the head contact. So will they need to change that? Because you know and it's the same with boxing, isn't it? They have schoolboy boxing, which is again head contact. What do you think is going to be the future for the rule sets for them then?
In the UK, head contact is going to be removed for under 18s. I think that's going to be a given, and I think we should start embracing that now, because that's what the evidence shows. Let's not wait for the litigation to take some of us down. Let's be proactive with this. We know more now. You know, I was watching the parliamentary debate on concussion, and you had Dr. Mike Loosemore on behalf of England Boxing saying that basically boxing is safe. He considers boxing to be safe. Amateur boxers and schoolboy boxers have died through repetitive head impacts. You know, you've got the British Boxing Board of Control on their website, top right on their website, scroll down. They've actually got the statement that amateur and schoolboy boxing is safe. There are no recorded incidents of traumatic brain injury. People have died through traumatic brain injury in these sports. You know, we can't put our heads in the sand anymore. We've got to, you know, we've got to do better. So, you know, legally, we've got this wealth of child welfare legislation that, with head contacts in sport, has not been tested yet, but it will be. And as I've said, we're low-hanging fruit. The Child Protection in Sport unit, CPSU, already agrees that allowing head contact in combat sports by their very policy is child abuse by definition, no different to emotional neglect or child sexual abuse. Obviously, there's different levels of it, but it's child abuse. You know, none of us want to have that moniker applied to us, but that's what it is. And some people say, how dare you say that I'm saying it's child abuse? I'm like, actually, I'm not. I'm just applying policy to happening. They're saying it is by their very policy. So we you know, I think we need to make the changes now before the litigation starts coming in. They've got to take the head contact away from the children. They've got to provide the appropriate medical facilities at these events. And yeah, we've got to put our socks up. It's that same old story. We've got to wake up. We've got to take action.
And I'm guessing it would definitely help if events started running with these rule sets, wouldn't it? Because then it would give, because then one of the arguments that I guess some coaching gyms are going to have is, well, if they don't do it, where are they going to compete? You know, so it's kind of like a chicken and egg sometimes, isn't it? I think with sometimes if some events were running with these rules in place and with, you know, written up guidance from governing bodies, it would be an easier transition, wouldn't it, for most people to do within their kind of community, I guess.
Yeah, adults over 18, we can do what we like. Let's just make it safer. Yeah, we've got a libertarian legal system in the UK. You know, it's legal until it's deemed to be illegal. However, if you look at offences against the person and consent, actually the Law Commission still consider that Thai boxing, mixed martial arts, and kickboxing is actually deemed illegal already. Hasn't been granted the exception that boxing has, and boxing is on very tenuous. It's on a knife edge, but it's still legal as well. So we've got to be careful on the legality side. But we've got to, you know, I've just lost my. So the post has just arrived. I was like, got distracted there. What was the question?
So no, I was just making the point that actually what might help is if we had events running with these rule sets that you're advising, because then it would give people a way to go, okay, well, this is what we're training for now. This is how you can compete and be safe. And I guess that's going to kind of get over one of the sticking points that some gyms and coaches are going to see as an issue for him.
Yeah, well, IMAF already are. Rapidly becoming it's a membership body, but it's rapidly becoming actually a governing body. And I can see IMAF actually becoming, or the English version of it, the subset of it, becoming the national governing body for mixed martial arts in the UK. I can see that. People like Mark Goddard incredibly strongly driving it forward. If you've got a UFC ref, an elite competitor himself, Mark Goddard, promoting no head contact for under 16s and enabling events with no head contact for under 16s, we all should actually be paying attention to that. And then you've also got a lot of Thai boxing, a lot of kickboxing events already not allowing head contact, driven by the referees, not allowing head contact for kids. It's already happening. It just needs to filter out to all people. You can still compete, but hey, why have the head contact until such a time when you're legally allowed to do so? We just need more of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I know those communities really well. You know, I spend loads of time in them. I guess I was kind of thinking, because I cross a lot of communities, I'm thinking those communities where they're still doing a lot of it, getting them to run events where there's some adaptations. Like I said, the tournament scene, the like continuous sport, contact karate. I think for them to kind of transition, someone would need to run some events with that adaptation of the rules, wouldn't they, to show people actually this is how it's going to be. Because like you said, traditionally in Muay Thai, head contact's always not been a thing for juniors. With the MMA guys becoming a lot more professional over the past 10 years, the rules have changed and adapted in line with what you see coming from the States. And, you know, like you mentioned Mark and other people, and, you know, they're doing great things. And I guess it's just tying it across all the combat sports communities, isn't it? Because you can't rubber stamp one and think, yeah, it's fine now. Everyone needs their own individual touch, don't they?
Yeah, it goes back to what we used to be like, you know, back when we were young, and everyone helping and supporting each other and learning from each other. And that's what we still need to do. But now, we're just going to put the participants more, you know, at the forefront. A couple of people I've been discussing this with actually consider that if they ran events without head contact for kids, they may actually get more competitors. Because a lot of people are put off by getting twatted in the head in competition. So it's, twat. It's a northern verb, isn't it? I twat, you twat, we twat, they twat, we all twat, twat and what it has. But yeah, you know, a lot of kids are getting put off by being hit in the head. So if we have events where children are not hit in the head, we might actually see competitors' levels actually increasing in level, which will mean there'll be more filtering through to the adults, and the sport may actually be stronger as a result. So rather than looking at a negative, there is actually the potential that we could see growth in our sports through this approach, which is obviously, it's good for everybody. People are going to be safer, pockets are going to be more filled, and more fun to be had. Without detracting from the long-term performance of those over 18. So yeah, changes are happening. It's just happening too slow, and we need to speed it up a bit.
So what's the future look like then? Do you think what's your aims? Obviously, you mentioned that you're doing this because you enjoy the PhD, but obviously you've really took on this advocacy role. You know, and because of your background, you know, I'm guessing there's not really many of the people that could have the respected perspective of yourself. What You know, and I guess sometimes it's like the Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. I'm guessing you're feeling obliged to kind of lead this a bit further now. What does the future like for you then?
So what I'm doing, so for example, at the moment I've got a couple of papers, one submitted and one's in progress at the moment. Before I'm waiting for COVID to come up so we can actually roll my actual research project for my PhD out in the field. We need people to start striking each other again. But I've got a paper in for recognising the signs and symptoms of concussion within combat sports, so we're better placed to recognise it and understand it. And I've written it in such a way that it's going to drive discussion and appropriate change, because raising knowledge and awareness, we only know what we know when we know it. You know, I'm raising things we're not paying attention to, so hopefully I can sort of point people in the right direction. So yeah, I've got a paper in recognising the signs and symptoms of concussion for referees, and an objective rationale for stopping a combat sports match based on these signs and symptoms. So it's not a referee, I think it's time to stop, or let's let it go, because sometimes fights are stopped too early, and sometimes fights are definitely stopped too late. How about everyone knowing what the fight is going to be stopped on and working to that? It's fairest for the fighters, the fans, the referee. It's fairest for everybody. So it's about getting things right for people there. So that's going through. Concussion protocols, head injury protocols for when it happens. What we don't see is, at the moment, what the research is showing us is that 24 to 48 hours of complete rest is required following that head injury. Then a gradual return to life functions, then a gradual return to school or work, and only then a gradual return to play. And we're talking weeks upon weeks after having a sign like a legs wobble or a headache or a bit of dodgy vision from getting hit in the head before you return to head impact. That's what's required for the most improved recovery. You never will actually fully recover. But all of that comes down to informed consent. A local forum asked, anyone give me advice on how to get into MMA? So I started with informed consent, letting them know that they're going to get brain injury. They are going to get traumatic brain injury. They are going to get musculoskeletal injuries. It will give them adverse life effects for the rest of their life. That's the information they need to know. If they decide to still continue, great. This is what we do to make it safer. And I've recommended all the various where to go from there. But it starts with informed consent. Every person, you know, people go, oh, we know the risks. That's not what the evidence shows. Every single piece of research shows that everyone in combat sports underestimates the risk. They don't understand the long-term consequences, let alone what to do about it. So I'm driving concussion head injury protocols to make sure that people understand it, consent to do the sports with the correct knowledge in mind, and know what to do about it. And in the future, I'm looking at finding ways of working with the behavioural effects of it to see what we can help do to rehabilitate people from that, to improve the mood disorders and such like that are generated from the head impacts. There's lots of work to go, and I'm part of a scholarly team that's connected to other scholarly teams around the world. There's lots of people working towards the same thing. Let's allow people to do sport, but hey, let's allow people to do the sport more safely in the future.
And if someone's listening or watching this now, is there somewhere they could go as for like a free resource to gain insights on, you know, some of the information that you've mentioned, you know, somewhere that you can direct people to?
Yeah, I mean, we can go pop culture. We've got the Will Smith film Concussion, telling the story of Bennet Omalu finding chronic traumatic encephalopathy in an NFL player's head, which initiated the entire litigation in sport at the moment through head injuries. It's a brilliant start. Developing from the work of Bennet Omalu, you've now got the Boston Brain Bank, Anne McKee and co over in Boston, who are dissecting brains of deceased players. And they've got something called the Concussion Legacy Foundation, the CLF. if you Google CLF, they have one heck of a lot of resources that people can use to help them understand what it is and what they can do about it. In the UK, one of my supervisors, Adam White, he's the head of Concussion Legacy Foundation UK, and more resources will be coming out as well. You can have a look at rugby and do their heads up, I think it's called, their head injury knowledge that you can get free online. It kind of protects rugby and doesn't go far enough, but it gives you a good idea of what you should be doing. And basically, the simplest way of recognizing it is if you get hit in the head, you've got traumatic brain injury as a result. Limit it. That's the simplest way of thinking. Yeah, there's a few resources out there. CLF UK, and the Rugby Heads Up program are great resources just for the start. For what to do about it, Google concussion in sport group, CISG, position statement, and you'll find out what you need to do after you've got a concussion as well. There's a few resources that can help people. But yeah, just keep an open mind and keep learning. We're learning more every day.
No, well, that's really useful, and I'm sure people will really get a lot from following that up. I've learned so much from our conversation. I'm really thankful for having you on today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for sparing the time. You've raised so many things that I'm sure everyone's gonna be thinking and ruining on now, and that's what change is. It's not comfortable, it's not easy, but it doesn't mean it's not right. You've got to kind of sometimes, you've got to take the bull by the horns, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, the thing for people to remember with the head injuries is it adversely affects performance. If you want to be a better fighter, you've got to pay attention to it. Ignoring the health side, let's think about performance alone. Sparring, getting head hits in contact. Remember, it's taking 3 steps forward and very nearly 3 steps back. Let's find out ways of taking the 3 steps forward without the steps back. Let's preserve our sport and keep us safe at the same time. Try and take a positive message from the doom and gloom that I said there. And thank you so much for having me on. It's great to have this platform to talk on. And let's just raise discussion. A friend of mine, JMac, Jonathan McDonald, he calls it thought expansion. Hopefully I've expanded some people's thoughts, and hopefully I've raised one heck of a lot of questions. Get hold of me on socials, fire questions at me and give me feedback. Let's keep the discussion going. We don't talk about it, we can't make changes. So let's educate each other.
No, well, I think like you said, you've definitely raised a lot of questions there. I'm sure people will be getting in touch. But like I said, thank you once again. It's been amazing. It's been an absolute pleasure. Guys, anyone listening or watching, make sure you go and check out Gary Turner's work, his research. And like I said, if you have any more questions about what we've discussed today, as I said, hit him up on social media, and I'm sure he'll be very happy to answer any questions and help in any way that he can.
Stuart, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Oh no, brilliant. Thank you once again, Gary.
My pleasure, my pleasure.